I stood in the center of the ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, champagne glass in hand, watching my fiancé Adrian kiss another woman under the mistletoe, while 60 of our closest friends and family applauded what they thought was innocent holiday fun. The woman was Kira Donovan, 28 years old, auburn hair, wearing a green velvet dress that matched the Christmas decorations. She was laughing as Adrian pulled away from the kiss, her hand resting on his chest in a way that was far too familiar, far too comfortable. Our engagement party, December 10th. 2 weeks before our planned Christmas wedding on December 24th, and my fiancé was kissing his ex-girlfriend while everyone cheered. I smiled and sipped my champagne, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of knowing exactly what I was watching. Because unlike everyone else in this room, I knew the truth about Adrian Crawford and Kira Donovan. I'd known for 10 weeks, and I'd spent every single day of those 10 weeks preparing for this exact moment. Isn't it sweet how he stays friendly with his ex? My mother whispered beside me. That shows maturity. Very mature, I agreed. My voice steady despite the fact that I knew the kiss I'd just witnessed was between two people who were legally married to each other, had been for 3 years. Still were, despite Adrian proposing to me 6 months ago and planning a Christmas wedding. My fiancé was a bigamist, or would have been, if I'd actually married him in 2 weeks. But I wasn't going to marry him. I was going to destroy him. Bryn, honey, you should get Adrian for the toast, my sister Mallory said, appearing at my elbow. People are waiting. Of course. Give me just a moment. I walked calmly through the crowd, greeting guests, smiling at well-wishers, playing the role of happy bride-to-be. I'd become excellent at this performance over the past 10 weeks. Smiling while dying inside, planning revenge while pretending ignorance, acting like I didn't know my entire future had been built on lies. Adrian saw me approaching and immediately moved away from Kira, his expression shifting to that practiced look of devotion he'd perfected. There's my beautiful fiancé. Ready for the toast? Almost. But first, I have something to share with everyone. A surprise. A surprise, Bryn? We didn't plan, I know, but I've been planning this for quite a while. Trust me, everyone's going to want to hear it. I took the microphone from the DJ booth before Adrian could object. The room quieted as I stood at the front, every eye on me. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate Adrian and me, I began, my voice clear and steady. I know we've been planning a Christmas wedding, and everyone's been so excited. But before we go any further with the festivities, I need to share something important. Something I discovered about 10 weeks ago that changed everything. Adrian's face had gone pale. In the back of the room, Kira Donovan had frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. I discovered that my fiancé is already married, to the woman he just kissed under the mistletoe. Kira Donovan. They've been married for 3 years. Still are, actually. I have the marriage certificate to prove it. The room erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers, people turning to stare at Adrian and Kira. My mother grabbed my arm. Bryn, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Adrian Crawford married Kira Donovan on September 15th, 2020, in Portland, Oregon. They never divorced. And 6 months ago, he proposed to me anyway, planning to commit bigamy on Christmas Eve. I pulled out my phone and displayed the first document on the screen behind me, the marriage certificate I'd obtained from Oregon's Vital Records Office. Adrian James Crawford and Kira Ann Donovan. Married, never dissolved. When a man promises you a Christmas wedding, I said quietly into the microphone, looking directly at Adrian's shocked face, you should probably make sure he's not already promised Christmas and every other day to someone else. That was the moment Adrian realized I'd been playing him. That I'd known for 10 weeks and had been strategically waiting for exactly this opportunity to expose him publicly, irreversibly, in front of everyone who mattered. That was the moment his carefully constructed lies began to collapse. And I watched it happen with perfect, cold satisfaction. 10 weeks earlier, I'd been a different person. Naive, trusting, planning a wedding with the man I thought was my soulmate. Adrian and I had been together for 18 months, engaged for 4 of those months. He was a financial consultant, charming and successful. I was a pediatric nurse at St. Augustine's Hospital. We'd met at a charity gala, fallen quickly into an intense relationship, and gotten engaged on a beach in Mexico. Everything had seemed perfect. Until September 28th, when I'd gone to Adrian's apartment to surprise him with lunch and found something I wasn't supposed to see. I'd let myself in with the key he'd given me. He'd been at work, or so I'd thought. The apartment had been empty, which was what I'd expected. I'd gone to his home office to leave the lunch on his desk, a sweet surprise for when he got home. That's when I'd seen it. The file cabinet drawer that was slightly open. The one he usually kept locked. I shouldn't have looked. That's what a trusting fiancé would say. But something had made me pause. Maybe intuition. Maybe the fact that Adrian had been weirdly secretive about that particular drawer. Maybe just bad timing. I'd opened it fully and found a file labeled K.D. Personal. Inside had been documents. Tax returns filed jointly with someone named Kira Donovan. Insurance policies listing her as spouse. Mortgage documents for a property in Portland showing both their names. And, at the very bottom, a copy of a marriage certificate from September 2020. I'd stood there for a long time, hands shaking, trying to process what I was seeing. Adrian was married, not divorced, not separated, not widowed, married, currently. To someone whose existence he'd never mentioned. My first instinct had been to confront him immediately, to call him, scream at him, demand explanations. But something had stopped me. Maybe the years of being a nurse, where staying calm during crises was essential. Maybe just self-preservation. Because if I confronted him without a plan, he could lie, manipulate, convince me these documents meant something other than what they clearly showed. So instead, I'd done something smarter. I'd photographed every document in that file. Every page of every form. The marriage certificate, the tax returns, the mortgage papers, the insurance policies, everything. Then I'd carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the drawer to the same slightly open position it had been in, and left the apartment. I'd gone home, locked my door, and spent 3 hours looking at those photos, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. Adrian Crawford had married Kira Donovan in September 2020. They'd filed joint tax returns through 2022. They'd owned property together in Portland until August 2023, when apparently Adrian had moved to Chicago, where he'd met me 8 months later in April 2024. But nowhere in those documents was there a divorce decree, no legal separation papers, no annulment records. He was still married when he'd proposed to me. Still married as we'd planned our Christmas wedding. Still married as I'd been shopping for a wedding dress and sending invitations. That night, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Adrian immediately. I was going to investigate. Verify everything I'd found. Figure out the full extent of his deception. And then, when I had complete understanding and ironclad evidence, I was going to make sure he faced consequences. I'd called in sick to work the next day and started my investigation. The first thing I'd done was verify the marriage certificate was real. I'd paid for an official copy from the Oregon Vital Records office, submitting the request online and having it sent to my friend Heather's address instead of my own. 2 weeks later, it had arrived, official, certified, undeniable proof that Adrian James Crawford had married Kira Ann Donovan on September 15, 2020, in Portland, Oregon. The certificate had listed his age as 29, hers as 25. It had been signed by an officiant and witnessed by 2 people whose names I didn't recognize. Everything about it was legitimate and legally binding. Next, I'd searched for any record of divorce. Oregon court records were accessible online for a fee. I'd spent hours searching every database I could find, looking for dissolution records, separation agreements, annulments, anything that would indicate the marriage had ended. Nothing. No divorce had ever been filed in Oregon, Washington, or Illinois, the 3 states Adrian had lived in during the relevant time period. The marriage remained legally valid. That had been the confirmation I'd needed. Adrian hadn't just failed to mention a previous marriage. He was currently married and planning to commit bigamy. My second step had been finding Kira Donovan. Social media had made that relatively easy. She'd had an Instagram account under her maiden name. She apparently still used Donovan professionally, and her bio had listed her as a graphic designer in Chicago. Chicago, not Portland. She'd moved here too. I'd scrolled through her posts carefully, looking for any mention of Adrian. Most of her content had been work-related or travel photos, but occasionally there'd been hints. A photo from last Christmas showing a man's hand holding hers the watch was one I recognized as Adrian's. A Valentine's Day post with the caption, "Grateful for my person," showing flowers I'd seen in Adrian's apartment. A summer photo at a restaurant Adrian had told me he'd gone to with work colleagues. Kira Donovan was in Adrian's life. Still. Currently. While he was engaged to me, I'd spent days debating whether to contact her directly. If she knew about me, she was complicit in his deception. If she didn't know, she was another victim. Either way, reaching out to her was risky. She might warn Adrian that I was investigating. Instead, I'd continued gathering information. I'd hired a private investigator, a woman named Sienna Blake, who'd been recommended by a friend who'd gone through a messy divorce. Sienna was professional, discreet, and efficient. "You want me to follow him?" she'd asked during our initial consultation. "I want to know if he's maintaining a relationship with his wife, where she lives, where he goes when he's not with me, whether they're actually together or just technically married. You think he's living a double life? I think he's either the world's worst communicator about his marital status, or he's deliberately deceiving both of us. I need to know which." Sienna had taken the case. For 3 weeks, she documented Adrian's movements, and what she'd found had been damning. Adrian was seeing Kira regularly. Not every day, but consistently. He'd gone to her apartment twice a week. They'd had dinner together at least once a week. They'd spent a weekend together in October at a hotel downtown, the same weekend Adrian had told me he was at a financial conference in Milwaukee. The photos Sienna had provided had been clear and undeniable. Adrian and Kira holding hands. Adrian kissing her goodbye at her apartment door. Adrian with his arm around her at a restaurant. All time-stamped. All dated. All during the period when he was engaged to me. He's maintaining 2 relationships, Sienna had concluded when she'd presented her findings. You're the public-facing fiancé. She's the wife he's keeping private. I don't know what his endgame is, but this is deliberate deception on a major scale. Can you find out if she knows about me? I can try to get more information about her side of the situation, but that might require me to approach her directly. Not yet. I need to think about strategy first, because that was the question. What was I going to do with this information? Confronting Adrian privately would give him opportunity to lie, to manipulate, to convince me I was misunderstanding. Confronting Kira might backfire if she was knowingly complicit. I needed something public, irreversible, and devastating. Something that would ensure Adrian faced consequences and couldn't talk his way out of what he'd done. That's when I'd started planning the engagement party reveal. The engagement party had been my mother's idea originally. "You should have something to celebrate before the wedding," she'd insisted. "Let people toast to your future together." I'd initially been hesitant. We were only having a small Christmas Eve wedding, so an engagement party seemed excessive. But once I discovered Adrian's secret marriage, the engagement party had become the perfect venue for exposure, public enough that he couldn't deny or minimize what I'd learned, formal enough that the revelation would have maximum impact, timed perfectly so that even if he tried to salvage the situation, our wedding would be too close for him to effectively manipulate anyone. I'd spent October and November playing the perfect fiancé while secretly orchestrating his downfall. I'd smiled at wedding planning meetings. I'd toured venues with my mother. I'd tasted cakes and selected flowers, all while knowing I was never going to walk down that aisle. The hardest part had been maintaining intimacy with Adrian while knowing what I knew. Every time he'd kissed me, I'd thought about him kissing Kira. Every time he'd said, "I love you," I'd thought about the vows he'd made to someone else. Every time he'd talked about our future, I'd wanted to scream that he was a liar. But I'd held it together. Because the revelation had to be perfect, timed perfectly, executed flawlessly. In early November, I'd made a decision about Kira. I'd needed to know if she was aware of my existence. If she knew Adrian was engaged to another woman while still married to her, I'd created a fake Instagram account and sent her a message, pretending to be someone who'd met Adrian at a work event and was curious about his relationship status. Her response had been telling, "Adrian's married to me. We've been together 5 years. Why do you ask?" She didn't know. Kira Donovan had no idea her husband was engaged to someone else, planning a Christmas wedding, living partially in my apartment while maintaining his relationship with her. Adrian had been deceiving both of us, playing us both. Maintaining 2 separate relationships with 2 separate women, keeping us compartmentalized and unaware of each other's existence. That realization had changed everything. Kira wasn't my enemy, she was a fellow victim, and she deserved to know the truth as much as I deserved to expose it. I'd spent the next 2 weeks carefully planning how to bring Kira into the revelation. I'd needed her at the engagement party, needed Adrian to see both of us, both of his deceptions, standing together as witnesses to his betrayal. So I'd done something bold. I'd sent Kira an anonymous email from an encrypted account. Your husband, Adrian Crawford, is engaged to marry another woman on December 24th. Her name is Bryn Michaels. They've been together 18 months. He's planning to commit bigamy. If you don't believe me, check his social media. Or better yet, come to their engagement party on December 10th at the Riverside Hotel. You deserve to know the truth. I'd included screenshots of Adrian's social media posts about me, photos of us together, a copy of our wedding invitation, everything she'd need to verify I was telling the truth. Then I'd waited to see if she'd show up. The party had been planned for December 10th, 2 weeks before our scheduled wedding. I'd sent invitations to all our friends and family. I'd hired caterers, decorated, arranged everything to look like a genuine celebration. And I'd quietly invited Kira Donovan, hoping she'd have the courage to confront what I'd revealed. On December 10th, as guests had begun arriving at the Riverside Hotel ballroom, I'd been calm, prepared, ready for whatever happened next. Adrian had been nervous he'd made some comment about not liking being the center of attention at parties. I'd assured him it would be fine, that it was just people who loved us wanting to celebrate. He'd had no idea what was coming. And then, at 7:15 p.m., Kira Donovan had walked through the ballroom doors wearing a green velvet dress and an expression of grim determination. She'd spotted Adrian immediately. He'd spotted her. And the panic in his eyes had told me everything I'd needed to know about his awareness of what he'd done. He'd managed to compose himself quickly, walking over to greet her as if her presence was expected and normal. Kira, I didn't know you'd be in town, didn't you? Her voice had been cold. Your fiancé invited me. Though that's an interesting word. Since I'm your wife, I can explain, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you have a whole story prepared, but I'd rather hear it in front of everyone here. Don't you think they deserve to know who you really are? That's when I'd stepped in, taking the microphone, and started my prepared speech. The one that would expose Adrian's deception to everyone who mattered. The one that would ensure he couldn't lie his way out of consequences. The one that would make him understand. When you betray someone who's smarter than you expect, you don't get to control the fallout. The immediate aftermath of my announcement had been chaos. My mother had grabbed my arm, demanding to know if what I was saying was true. Adrian's parents had gone pale and speechless. Friends had pulled out their phones, looking at the marriage certificate I'd displayed, trying to process what I was revealing. And Adrian had stood frozen in the center of the room, his carefully constructed lies collapsing around him. Kira had walked to the front of the room to stand beside me. We'd never met in person before that moment. But there'd been an immediate understanding between us. Two women who'd been deceived by the same man. Two victims who were now becoming witnesses against him. Bryn, this is insane. Adrian had finally found his voice. You're misunderstanding. I'm not misunderstanding anything. You married Kira in September 2020. You never divorced her. You proposed to me in May 2024, while still legally married to her. That's not misunderstanding. That's bigamy. That's fraud. That's you, being a liar and a cheat. There are reasons, complicated reasons. Then explain them, right now, in front of everyone. Tell us all why you're married to Kira while engaged to me. Tell us why you've been maintaining relationships with both of us simultaneously. Tell us the complicated reasons that justify what you've done. He'd looked around the room at 60 pairs of eyes staring at him, waiting for explanation. His parents, his colleagues, our friends, my family, all of them watching, judging, demanding answers. I think we should discuss this privately, he'd started. No, Kira had cut him off. You've done enough privately. You've lied privately, cheated privately, deceived privately. Now you can face consequences publicly. Kira, I never meant to hurt you, but you did hurt me. You hurt both of us. You promised me forever 3 years ago, and you never bothered to mention that forever would include being engaged to someone else. What was your plan, Adrian? Marry Bryn and keep me on the side? Divorce me secretly and hope I never found out? What exactly was the endgame here? Adrian had no answer. Or rather, he'd had no answer he could give publicly that wouldn't make him look worse. My father had stepped forward then, his face red with anger. Get out. Get out of this hotel. We don't want you here, Mr. Michaels. Please let me explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to my daughter for 18 months? That you planned to marry her while already married to someone else? That you've made fools of all of us? No, there's nothing to explain. Leave, now. Adrian's own parents had said nothing in his defense. His mother had been crying quietly. His father had looked disgusted. Neither of them had moved to support him or argue that he deserved another chance. I'll leave, Adrian had finally said. But Bryn, we need to talk, please. Let me explain what happened. There's nothing to explain. And we're done talking. My attorney will be in contact regarding the financial and legal matters we need to resolve. Beyond that, I never want to see you again. Your attorney? Bryn, you don't need to involve lawyers. You committed fraud. Financial fraud, since we've been sharing expenses for an engagement and wedding based on false pretenses. Emotional fraud, since our entire relationship was built on you hiding a legal marriage. Yes, Adrian, I'm involving attorneys. I'm involving everyone necessary to make sure you face full consequences for what you've done. That's when hotel security had arrived. I'd quietly arranged for them to be nearby in case Adrian refused to leave peacefully. They'd escorted him out while he'd tried to maintain dignity, tried to look like this was a misunderstanding he'd clear up later. But the truth had been clear to everyone in that room. Adrian Crawford was a bigamist, a liar, and a manipulator, and his deceptions had just been exposed in the most public, irreversible way possible. After he'd left, the party had dissolved into conversations. People had approached me and Kira, asking questions, offering support, expressing shock. My mother had hugged me tightly. Why didn't you tell me you knew? Because I needed to handle it my way. On my terms. With full control over how the truth came out. You've been dealing with this alone for 10 weeks? I had to. If I'd told anyone, word might have gotten back to Adrian. He might have tried to manipulate the situation, prepare counter lies, convince people I was wrong. This way, the truth came out undeniably, publicly, with evidence he couldn't refute. That's incredibly strong of you. It's self-preservation. He tried to destroy my future. I made sure he couldn't. Kira and I had finally talked privately around 9 p.m. after most guests had left. We'd sat in a quiet corner of the hotel bar, two strangers who'd been intimately connected through one man's deception. Thank you for telling me, she'd said. I had no idea he was engaged to you, no idea he was planning another wedding. I thought we were working through some difficulties in our marriage, but that he was ultimately committed to me. How long has it been since you saw him regularly? He moved to Chicago, supposedly for a job opportunity last year, August 2023. He said it was temporary, that he'd move back to Portland once the contract ended, but then the contract kept getting extended. We've been doing long distance, or so I thought. He'd visit me every few weeks, or I'd come to Chicago to see him. I had no idea he'd built an entire other relationship here. He told me he moved to Chicago for a fresh start after a difficult breakup. That you existed at all, let alone that you were his wife, never came up. A difficult breakup. That's one way to describe a marriage you never bothered ending. What are you going to do now? File for divorce. Immediately. I wanted to work on our marriage, but there's no marriage to work on. He's been lying to me for over a year. That's unforgivable. I'm doing the same. Breaking the engagement, obviously, but also pursuing legal action for fraud. He's defrauded both of us financially, emotionally, legally. Can you actually sue him for that? I've already consulted with an attorney. Yes, I can, and I will. We'd exchanged contact information that night. Two women who'd been pitted unknowingly against each other by the same man, now united against him. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was alliance. And that alliance would prove crucial in the weeks ahead. The morning after the engagement party, I'd woken up to dozens of messages. Friends checking on me, family members offering support, Adrian attempting to call repeatedly. I'd blocked his number after the third call and spent the day with my sister Mallory, who'd helped me start the process of untangling my life from his. What about the wedding? Mallory had asked. All those deposits? The venue, the caterers, I'm canceling everything. I'll lose some deposits, but that's better than marrying a bigamist. Do you think he would have actually gone through with it? Married you while still married to Kira? I don't know. Maybe he was planning to divorce her quietly before the wedding. Maybe he thought he could maintain both relationships indefinitely. Maybe he's just that delusional. Either way, it doesn't matter now. You're handling this incredibly well. I've had 10 weeks to process this, Mallory. 10 weeks of knowing, investigating, planning. The shock wore off weeks ago. Now I'm just executing the plan, which is make sure Adrian faces every legal, financial, social, and professional consequence available for what he's done. I'd spent December 11th calling vendors, canceling the wedding, explaining the situation. Most had been understanding. Some had waived cancellation fees after hearing about Adrian's deception. The wedding dress I'd already paid for had been a loss, but the boutique had offered to sell it for me on consignment. On December 12th, I'd met with my attorney, a family law specialist named Theodore Paxton, who'd been highly recommended. "You want to sue him for fraud?" Theodore had asked after I'd explained the situation. "Can I?" "Potentially, yes. He engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation. He represented himself as single and available for marriage when he was legally married to someone else. You relied on that misrepresentation in making financial and life decisions. You've suffered damages as a result. That's a viable fraud claim. What kind of damages can I claim? Financial damages would include any money you spent on the wedding planning and engagement based on his false representation. Emotional distress damages might also be available, though those are harder to quantify. The goal would be to recover everything you lost financially and otherwise because of his deception. I want him to face consequences. Real, significant consequences. Not just a slap on the wrist. The legal system will provide some of that, but there are other consequences too. Professional reputation damage, social consequences, potential criminal charges. Criminal charges? Bigamy is a crime in Illinois. If he'd actually married you while still married to Kira, he'd have committed a felony. Even attempting to do so could potentially be prosecutable. You might want to consider filing a police report. I'd left Theodore's office with a clear action plan. File the civil fraud lawsuit. Consider criminal charges. Ensure Adrian's deception had maximum consequences. That evening, Kira had called me. I filed for divorce today. My attorney says it should be straightforward since I have clear evidence of his adultery and fraud. Good. I'm filing a civil fraud suit against him. My attorney thinks we have a strong case. Can I join that suit? He defrauded me too, made me think our marriage was viable while he was building a relationship with you. I'll ask my attorney about adding you as a co-plaintiff. We'd be stronger together anyway. Agreed. Also, I've been thinking, what does Adrian do for work? Financial consulting, right? Yes. Why? His professional reputation matters in that field. Trust, ethics, honesty, those are essential. If his clients and colleagues knew he'd committed bigamy, attempted fraud, lied systematically for over a year, that would damage his career significantly. You want to expose him professionally too. Don't you think his employer should know what kind of person they've hired, what kind of ethical standards he maintains in his personal life? She'd been right. Adrian's professional consequences should match his personal ones. He'd built his career on appearing trustworthy and ethical. Revealing his private behavior would undermine all of that. I know someone who works at his firm, I'd said slowly. We could arrange for the information to reach HR through unofficial channels. Do it. He doesn't deserve to get away with this professionally just because his personal lies got exposed. By December 15th, word had spread through Adrian's professional network. Someone had sent an anonymous email to his firm's managing partners detailing his attempted bigamy, including copies of the marriage certificate and our engagement announcement. Adrian had been called into a meeting with HR and asked to explain the situation. He'd been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Not fired outright, but effectively benched while the firm determined whether his personal conduct violated their ethical standards. His professional world was crumbling, just like his personal one, and I'd felt no guilt about it, because Adrian had built his success on appearing to be someone he wasn't. Now people were seeing who he actually was and adjusting their treatment of him accordingly. That was justice, not revenge. Christmas approached, and with it, what should have been my wedding day. December 24th had been carefully chosen a Christmas Eve wedding, romantic and memorable. Now it was just another day marking Adrian's deception. I'd taken the week off work, not for wedding preparations but for self-care and healing. I'd spent time with family, seen a therapist, processed the betrayal that I'd been too focused on investigating to fully feel. You're angrier now than you were when you first found out, Mallory had observed during a sister lunch on December 18th. I was focused then. Investigative mode. Now that the exposure's done and the consequences are rolling out, I'm letting myself actually feel it. And what are you feeling? Rage, mostly. He stole 18 months of my life. He made me believe in a future that was completely fake. He was planning to either commit bigamy or divorce Kira secretly without telling me. Either way, He was manipulating both of us for his own benefit. Do you know why he did it? What he was trying to accomplish? I don't know. Maybe he wanted both of us. Maybe he couldn't decide. Maybe he's just that narcissistic that he thought he could maintain two relationships indefinitely without consequences. I don't actually care about his motives anymore. I just care that he faces appropriate consequences. Which are? The divorce between him and Kira should be finalized by February. My fraud lawsuit is moving forward. His professional reputation is damaged. His family is ashamed of him. His friends know what he did. He's facing exactly what he deserves. And you? How are you doing beyond the revenge planning? That was harder to answer. Professionally, I was fine work, had been understanding, and I'd thrown myself into patient care as a distraction. Financially, I was managing the lawsuit would hopefully recover my losses. Socially, I had tremendous support. But emotionally, I was devastated. Not because I missed Adrian, the man I'd thought I was in love with had never really existed. But because I'd lost 18 months to someone who'd never valued me properly. Because I'd been planning a future with someone who'd been fundamentally lying about who he was. Because I'd been betrayed so thoroughly and never saw it coming until I'd stumbled on those documents. I'm surviving, I'd told Mallory. That's about all I can claim right now. On December 22nd, I'd received an unexpected call from Adrian's mother, Patricia. Bryn, I need to apologize to you. Mrs. Crawford, you don't need to, I do. I raised him. Something went wrong in how I raised him that made him think this behavior was acceptable. I'm horrified by what he did to you and Kira. You both deserved better. Thank you for saying that. I also want you to know his father and I have cut him off financially. We're not supporting him through this disaster he created. He's on his own. If that helps your lawsuit, I wanted you to know. It does help, thank you. I'm sorry, Bryn. Truly sorry. You would have been a wonderful daughter-in-law. I wish things had been different. After we'd hung up, I'd cried. Not because I missed Adrian or regretted my choices, but because Patricia's kindness had touched something I'd been keeping buried. The loss of what I'd thought my future would be. The grief for the relationship that had never been real. December 24th arrived. My would-be wedding day. Instead of getting married, I'd spent the morning with my family, then the afternoon at Heather's house with close friends. We'd had wine and comfort food and watched terrible Christmas movies. No one had mentioned Adrian or the wedding that should have been happening. At 7 p.m., what would have been the ceremony time, my phone had rung. Theodore, my attorney. Bryn, I have news. Adrian's firm has terminated his employment. For what reason? Violation of ethical standards. They concluded that his personal conduct attempted bigamy, systematic fraud reflected on his professional trustworthiness. Their clients expect the highest integrity from financial consultants. They couldn't keep him employed after what he did became known. So, he's lost his job completely. Yes, and that strengthens your damages case. His ability to pay has diminished, but it also demonstrates clear consequences for his actions. After the call, I'd sat quietly, processing. Adrian had lost his fiancé, his wife, his professional reputation, his job, his family's respect. Everything he'd built had collapsed because of his deceptions. Part of me felt satisfied. He deserved every consequence. But part of me just felt sad. Sad that this was what my relationship had come to. Sad that someone I'd loved had been capable of such systematic betrayal. Sad that 18 months of my life had been wasted on lies. Kira had texted me that evening. Thinking about you today. I know what today was supposed to be. Are you okay? As okay as I can be. You? Same. It's strange. I'm divorcing him, but I'm still sad about what we lost. Or what I thought we had. I understand that completely. Want to get coffee tomorrow? Not quite widows supporting each other? I'd like that. We'd met on December 25th, Christmas morning, at a quiet cafe. Two women who'd been betrayed by the same man, finding something resembling friendship in shared experience. Do you think he ever actually loved either of us? Kira had asked over lattes. I don't know. Maybe he loved the version of himself that each of us reflected back to him. Maybe he loved having two women who adored him. Maybe he's just incapable of real love because he's too narcissistic. My therapist says some people are fundamentally dishonest, not just lying occasionally, but building entire lives on deception. She thinks Adrian might be like that. Does that help? Thinking of it as a character flaw rather than a choice? Not really. Either way, he chose to hurt us. He chose to lie. He chose to maintain two separate relationships while hiding each of us from the other. That's deliberate, regardless of whether it's a character flaw. Agreed. We'd talked for 2 hours that morning, processing, supporting each other, building something genuine from the wreckage of Adrian's lies. It wasn't the friendship I'd expected to find, but it was real. And after 18 months of a fake relationship, real mattered more than anything. January 2025 brought new developments. The fraud lawsuit officially proceeded, with both Kira and me listed as plaintiffs. Theodore had compiled a devastating case, financial records showing shared expenses for a fake wedding, emotional distress documented through therapy records, evidence of Adrian's systematic deception spanning over a year. He'll probably try to settle, Theodore had predicted. Once he sees the evidence we've compiled, fighting this in court would be foolish. He'd lose, and it would cost him more in legal fees than settling. I want him in court. I want a judge to hear what he did and rule publicly that he's liable. That's your choice. But consider a settlement might get you financial recovery faster, and it might be less emotionally draining than a full trial. I'll think about it. But I'd known already that I wanted the public trial. Wanted Adrian's deception documented in legal records. Wanted a judge to officially declare what he'd done was wrong and deserving of consequences. On January 15th, Adrian's attorney had reached out to Theodore with a settlement offer. Adrian would pay $40,000 split between Kira and me, effectively recovering all the money we'd each spent on wedding planning and related expenses, plus a formal apology in exchange for us dropping the lawsuit and signing non-disclosure agreements. Non-disclosure agreements? I'd repeated when Theodore had told me about the offer. He wants to pay us to stay quiet about what he did? Essentially, yes. That's standard in settlements like this. He pays damages, you agree not to publicly discuss the case. Absolutely not. I didn't expose him publicly, just to take money and shut up about it. The whole point was ensuring he faced public consequences. Then we proceed to trial. Kira had agreed when I'd told her about my decision. I don't need his money as much as I need people to know what he did. Let's take this to court. The trial had been scheduled for March 2025. That gave us weeks to prepare, to gather testimony, to build an ironclad case that Adrian Crawford had committed fraud against both of us and deserved significant financial penalties. In February, I'd gotten back to something resembling normal life. I'd returned to full-time nursing, thrown myself into my work with renewed focus. I'd started dating someone new carefully, slowly, with clear boundaries and no rush toward commitment. I'd rebuilt my social life around genuine friends who'd supported me through the exposure and aftermath. Adrian, meanwhile, had spiraled. I'd heard through mutual connections that he was working a temporary consulting gig that paid poorly compared to his previous position, that he'd moved to a smaller apartment, that he was drinking heavily and avoiding social situations where people might recognize him and his disgrace. Part of me felt bad for him, but a larger part remembered that he'd brought all of this on himself through systematic, deliberate deception. He hadn't made one mistake in a moment of weakness. He'd constructed elaborate lies over more than a year, deceived 2 women simultaneously, planned to commit bigamy. His current suffering was consequence, not injustice. On February 28th, the night before the trial, I'd had dinner with Kira. "Are you nervous?" she'd asked. Not nervous. Determined. This is the final step. After tomorrow, we'll have legal validation that what he did was wrong. We'll have financial recovery. We'll have closure. Do you think he'll show up? He has to. His attorney probably advised him that not showing up would make things worse. I can't decide if I want to see him or not. Part of me wants to look him in the eye and make him see what he did to us. Part of me never wants to see his face again. I just want to hear a judge say he's liable. That's all I need now. The trial began on March 1st, 2025. Judge Patricia Monroe, no relation to Adrian's mother, presiding. Theodore presented our case methodically. The marriage certificate proving Adrian was married to Kira, the engagement announcement proving he'd proposed to me, financial records showing we'd both spent substantial money based on his representations, testimony from both of us about the emotional impact of his deceptions. Adrian's attorney had tried to argue that our damages were overstated, that we'd both eventually moved on, that Adrian's financial situation didn't allow for significant penalties. But the evidence had been overwhelming. The judge had been visibly disgusted by Adrian's conduct as details emerged. Mr. Crawford, Judge Monroe had said after hearing testimony, what you did was not just unethical, it was cruel. You led two women to believe you were committed to them, made them spend money and time on relationships, built entirely on lies, and showed absolutely no regard for the damage you were causing. The court finds you liable for fraud and awards damages as follows. We'd won. Both of us. The judge had awarded me $35,000 in damages covering my wedding expenses, engagement costs, and emotional distress. Kira had been awarded $25,000 less than mine because she'd spent less on their relationship, but still substantial. Additionally, the judge had ordered Adrian to pay both our legal fees. This court wants to be clear, Judge Monroe had concluded. Mr. Crawford's conduct was reprehensible. The damages awarded today are not just compensation for financial losses, they're recognition that deliberately deceiving someone about your marital status, then planning to marry them fraudulently, causes real, serious harm. I hope these consequences serve as deterrent to anyone else who might consider similar conduct. After the verdict, Kira and I had hugged in the courthouse hallway. We did it. We held him accountable. We did. And now it's over. Really over. Now we rebuild. Properly this time. That evening, I'd gotten a message from an unknown number. When I'd opened it, I'd found a long text from Adrian. Bryn, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you terribly. But I need you to understand I never meant for any of this to happen. I loved you. I loved Kira. I couldn't choose between you, so I tried to have both. I know that was wrong. I know I destroyed everything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. I'd read it once, then deleted it without responding. Because Adrian's apology, like everything else about him, was too little and too late. He'd had endless opportunities to tell the truth, to choose honesty, to end one relationship before starting another. He'd chosen deception every time. Now he was facing consequences. And I no longer cared about his regrets. Spring 2025 brought a sense of renewal I hadn't expected. The trial was over, the damages awarded, the legal closure achieved. I'd thrown myself into work and personal growth, determined to move forward rather than dwelling on the past. In April, I'd been promoted at work, recognition of my dedication and skill that had nothing to do with my personal life disasters. I'd moved into a new apartment, one with no memories of Adrian, starting fresh in a space that was entirely mine. Kira had moved back to Portland in March, deciding Chicago held too many painful associations. We'd stayed in touch through regular texts and calls, our unusual friendship deepening as we'd both worked through the aftermath of Adrian's betrayal. I'm dating someone new, she'd told me during a call in late April. It's slow and careful, but he's genuinely kind, honest, nothing like Adrian. That's wonderful. You deserve someone genuine. You're dating too, right? That guy you mentioned, the teacher? Bryce. Yes. We've been seeing each other for about 2 months now. He knows everything about what happened with Adrian, and he's been incredibly patient with my trust issues. Are you happy? Getting there? It's not the happy I thought I'd have back when I was engaged to Adrian. It's different, more cautious, but it's real. And after 18 months of fake, real feels incredibly valuable. In May, I'd heard through connections that Adrian had moved out of state, Florida, apparently, seeking work in a market where his reputation hadn't been destroyed. Starting over somewhere people didn't know about his failed bigamy attempt and fraud conviction. Good riddance, Mallory had said when I'd told her. Let him rebuild far away from you. I hope he's learned something. That he's actually facing what he did and changing. But honestly, I don't care that much anymore. He's not my problem. That's growth. Or maybe just exhaustion. I spent so much energy on exposing him and holding him accountable. Now I just want to focus on my own life. By June, the damages he'd been ordered to pay had been partially collected. Adrian's wages had been garnished, and I'd received about $15,000 so far. Theodore was confident we'd eventually collect the full amount, though it might take time given Adrian's diminished earning capacity. Is it worth pursuing if it takes years? I'd asked Theodore during a check-in meeting. That depends on whether you value the principal or the money more. Financially, you've recovered most of your losses. But keeping the garnishment in place ensures continued consequences for Adrian. Then we keep it in place. He doesn't get to walk away clean. Understood. On June 15th, I'd had an unexpected conversation with a friend from nursing school who'd followed my story through social media posts and mutual friends. "Bryn, I need to tell you something. What you did, exposing Adrian publicly, taking him to court, refusing to accept his deception, that inspired me." "Inspired you? How?" "I was in a relationship where I was being lied to constantly. Small lies, but constant. I kept forgiving him, kept believing he'd change. Watching you refuse to accept that with Adrian made me realize I didn't have to accept it either. I ended things with my boyfriend, and I feel free. I'm glad you found the strength to do that. You showed me strength is possible, that we don't have to accept being treated badly just because we love someone, that boundaries matter. Thank you." That conversation had stayed with me, because my decision to expose Adrian hadn't just been about personal revenge, it had been about refusing to be a victim, refusing to stay silent about betrayal, refusing to let someone get away with using and manipulating people. If my story had helped even one person recognize they deserved better, then all the pain of the exposure and trial had been worthwhile. July brought my birthday, 32 years old. A year ago, I'd been engaged to Adrian, planning a Christmas wedding, thinking I knew what my future looked like. Now I was single, living alone, cautiously dating someone new, and rebuilding a life that was mine alone. My family and friends had thrown me a surprise party. Nothing elaborate, just people who loved me gathering to celebrate. Bryce had been there, fitting naturally into my social circle. Mallory had made a toast to Bryn, who faced betrayal with courage, demanded justice with determination, and is building a life with wisdom. "You're stronger than you know, and we're lucky to have you in our lives." I'd cried a little, grateful for the support that had carried me through the darkest months. Later that evening, Bryce and I had taken a walk by the lake. "Are you happy?" he'd asked. "I'm getting there. It's been a rough year, but I'm learning what I want and what I won't accept. That's valuable. You're remarkable. You know that? The way you handled everything with Adrian, I don't know many people who could have done that. I didn't have a choice. Either I stood up for myself or I let him get away with it. Standing up was the only option that let me respect myself. That's what makes you remarkable." By August, Adrian had faded almost completely from my daily thoughts. I'd occasionally see a post about him on social media. He was trying to rebuild his career in Florida, apparently doing contract work for smaller firms. But he'd become background noise in my life rather than central figure. The man I'd thought I'd marry, the man who'd betrayed me so thoroughly, had become just someone I used to know. Someone whose deception had taught me important lessons, but no longer held emotional power over me. That felt like victory. Not the dramatic, satisfying victory of the engagement party exposure or the trial verdict, but the quiet, lasting victory of moving forward and building happiness without him. September 2025 marked 1 year since I'd discovered Adrian's secret marriage. September 28th. The day I'd found those documents in his filing cabinet had been the day everything changed. A year later, I'd reflected on how much had transformed. I'd learned I was stronger than I'd known. That I could face betrayal with strategy rather than just emotion. That justice, while not always satisfying, was possible. That rebuilding after disaster took time, but was absolutely achievable. I'd written a journal entry that day. 1 year ago, I found out the man I loved was married to someone else. I could have confronted him immediately, could have collapsed into the betrayal, could have let him control the narrative. Instead, I investigated. I planned. I gathered evidence and waited for the perfect moment to expose him publicly, irreversibly. Was it revenge? Maybe. But it was also justice. He'd systematically deceived 2 women, planned to commit bigamy, built an entire life on lies. He deserved consequences, and I made sure he faced them. Looking back now, I'm proud of how I handled it. I didn't let emotion override strategy. I didn't accept his lies or let him manipulate the situation. I demanded accountability, and got it. The relationship was fake, the betrayal was real, but so was my response. And that response, calm, calculated, devastating, was exactly what the situation required. I've learned I can survive anything. I've learned to trust my instincts. I've learned that demanding respect and honesty isn't asking too much, it's the bare minimum of what I deserve. A year ago, I thought my life was ending. It turned out it was just beginning. On my terms, with my boundaries, building toward a future I actually want rather than one based on someone else's lies. Kira had called that day too. It's been a year since you found those documents. How are you feeling? Grateful, actually. Grateful I found out before the wedding. Grateful I had the courage to investigate, rather than just accepting the surface story. Grateful it's over. Me too. If you hadn't contacted me, I might have spent years more thinking Adrian and I just had marriage problems we were working through. I wouldn't have known he was building an entire other relationship. We saved each other, in a way. We did. And I think we came out of it better than we went in. Stronger, wiser, less willing to accept treatment that doesn't serve us. Absolutely. October brought an unexpected opportunity. A local women's organization had asked me to speak at their annual conference about surviving betrayal and demanding justice. Apparently, word had spread about how I'd handled Adrian's deception, and they thought my story would resonate with their members. I'd hesitated initially. Publicly discussing private pain wasn't comfortable. But then I thought about my friend who'd said my story inspired her to leave her lying boyfriend. About other women who might need to hear that strength was possible, that demanding accountability wasn't vindictive. So I'd agreed. On October 20th, I'd stood in front of 200 women and told my story. When I discovered my fiancé was married to someone else, I had a choice. I could confront him immediately and let him control the narrative with lies and manipulation. Or I could investigate, gather evidence, and expose him in a way that made lying impossible. I chose investigation. For 10 weeks, I pretended I didn't know. I planned our engagement party while secretly documenting his deception. I acted like the happy fiancé while building a case against him. Some people have asked if that makes me manipulative. I don't think so. I think it makes me strategic. Because if I'd confronted him privately, he'd have lied. He'd have minimized. He'd have convinced people I was overreacting or misunderstanding. By waiting and exposing him publicly with undeniable evidence, I ensured he faced real consequences. Was it hard? Absolutely. Was it worth it? Completely. Because here's what I learned. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept lies, they'll keep lying. If you accept betrayal, they'll keep betraying. But if you demand accountability, if you refuse to let someone get away with using you, you teach them that you have standards, that you respect yourself, that you won't be a victim. My message to all of you is simple. You don't have to accept treatment that harms you. You don't have to stay quiet about betrayal. You don't have to protect someone's reputation when they've destroyed your trust. Demand better. Demand honesty. Demand respect. And if someone can't provide those things, demand they face consequences. That's not revenge. That's self-respect. And you deserve nothing less. The applause had been thunderous. After my speech, dozens of women had approached me, some sharing their own betrayal stories, some thanking me for modeling strength, some asking advice about their own situations. I'd realized then that Adrian's betrayal had given me something unexpected, a platform to help others, a story that resonated, a voice that could encourage people facing similar situations. The pain had been transformed into purpose. And that transformation felt like the ultimate victory over what he'd tried to do to me. November 2025 brought an unexpected development. I'd been contacted by a literary agent who'd heard about my story through the women's conference speech. Have you ever considered writing a book about your experience? She'd asked during our initial phone call. A book? About Adrian and what happened? Not just about the betrayal, about how you handled it, the investigation, the strategic exposure, the aftermath. It's a compelling story about refusing to be a victim and demanding justice. I think it would resonate with a lot of readers. I'd been skeptical initially. Writing a book meant reliving the pain publicly, in detail, but it also meant potential to help people on a larger scale than conference speeches could achieve. Let me think about it, I'd said. I'd discussed it with Bryce that evening over dinner. We'd been together 6 months by then, and he'd become someone I trusted completely. Do you want to write about it? He'd asked. Part of me does. Part of me wants to take that pain and turn it into something that helps people. But part of me just wants to move on and leave Adrian in the past where he belongs. Those aren't mutually exclusive. You can write the book as a way of moving on, processing everything by putting it into narrative form. What if Adrian reads it and gets angry? Let him be angry. You'd be telling the truth. And more importantly, you'd be helping people who need to hear your story. That matters more than his feelings about being exposed. I'd agreed to meet with the agent again in December to discuss what a book might look like. By then, I'd have clarity on whether I wanted to take on such a public project. Thanksgiving arrived, and I'd spent it with my family. It was strange to think that last Thanksgiving, I'd been engaged to Adrian, bringing him to family gatherings, planning a future with him. Now I was single, well, dating Bryce, but casually, rebuilding, fundamentally changed. You seem happier now than you did last year. My mother had observed while we'd been cooking together. I am. Last year, I was in a relationship with someone who was lying to me constantly. I just didn't know it yet. Now I'm with someone honest. That makes all the difference. Bryce is lovely, but even beyond him, you're different. More confident, more certain of yourself. I learned I can handle anything. That's powerful knowledge. December approached, bringing with it the anniversary of the engagement party exposure. 1 year since I'd stood in that ballroom and revealed Adrian's deception to everyone who mattered. 1 year since I'd made him face public consequences for private lies. On December 10th, exactly a year after the party, I'd met with a literary agent and signed a contract to write a book about my experience. The working title was When He Promised Forever, Exposing the Man Who Lived 2 Lives. This is going to help a lot of people, the agent had said. Your story isn't just about romantic betrayal. It's about recognizing when you're being manipulated, refusing to accept that manipulation, and demanding accountability. That's universal. I'd started writing in mid-December, working through the memories chronologically, finding those documents, investigating Adrian's double life, planning the exposure, the engagement party reveal, the trial, the aftermath and rebuilding. Writing it had been cathartic, painful in moments, but ultimately healing. Because I'd been able to shape the narrative, control how the story was told, ensure my voice came through clearly. Christmas Eve arrived, what would have been my 2nd anniversary of the planned wedding with Adrian. Instead, I'd spent the evening at Bryce's apartment, having a quiet dinner, exchanging thoughtful gifts, building something real and honest. "Do you think about what might have been?" Bryce had asked as we'd sat by his Christmas tree. "If you'd married Adrian before finding out?" "Sometimes. I think about how close I came to legally tying myself to someone who was fundamentally dishonest. How much worse the discovery would have been if we'd been married. How lucky I am that I found those documents when I did. Do you believe in fate? I believe in paying attention. I could have ignored that open filing cabinet. Could have respected his privacy and not looked. But something made me look. Maybe intuition. Maybe luck. Maybe just timing. Either way, I'm grateful. Me too. Because if you'd married him, I wouldn't have you now. And I wouldn't have learned what real honesty looks like. After Adrian's lies, your transparency is remarkable. You don't know how much I value that. We'd stayed up until midnight, talking about the future, making plans, building something together that was based on truth rather than deception. It was the best Christmas Eve I'd had in years. On December 25th, Christmas morning, I'd received a text from Kira. "Merry Christmas. Hope you're doing well. Grateful for you and what we survived together." I'd replied, "Merry Christmas. Grateful for you too. We came out of this stronger." And that was true. Adrian had tried to use and manipulate both of us, but we'd survived, exposed him, held him accountable, and built better lives in the aftermath. That was the real victory, not just that he'd faced consequences, but that we'd refused to let his betrayal define us. January 2026 brought a new year and new perspectives. I'd been writing the book steadily, about halfway through the manuscript. The process had been revealing. Revisiting those months from discovery to exposure to aftermath had shown me just how much I'd grown. The woman who'd found those documents in September 2024 had been different from who I was now. More naive, more trusting, more willing to accept surface appearances. The investigation and exposure had transformed me into someone more cautious, more strategic, more demanding of honesty. I wasn't sure if that transformation was entirely positive. There was something lost in the innocence of trusting easily. But there was something gained too. Self-protection, boundaries, the knowledge that I could handle betrayal and come out stronger. In February, I'd gotten unexpected news. Adrian had been arrested in Florida for fraud related to his consulting work. Apparently, he'd misrepresented his credentials to clients, inflated his qualifications, and provided substandard financial advice that had cost people money. He's being charged with several counts of fraud, Theodore had told me when he'd called with the news. This is separate from what he did to you and Kira, but it shows a pattern. He's fundamentally dishonest. Is this going to affect our damages collection? Possibly. If he's convicted and faces fines or restitution to his Florida victims, that might compete with our judgment. But we have priority since our judgment came first. Good. Let him face consequences there too. Maybe this time he'll actually learn something. But I doubted it. People like Adrian, people who built entire lives on deception, rarely learned from consequences. They just got better at lying or moved on to new victims. By March, I'd finished the first draft of the book. My agent had read it and called me immediately. "Bryn, this is powerful. Your voice comes through so clearly. The way you describe the investigation, the exposure, the aftermath, it's compelling. Readers are going to connect with this." You think people will actually want to read about my failed engagement? I think people will want to read about a woman who refused to be a victim, who strategically exposed betrayal, and who rebuilt her life with strength and wisdom. That's inspirational. The book had been scheduled for publication in September 2026, almost exactly 2 years after I discovered Adrian's secret marriage. It felt symbolically appropriate, full circle from discovery to aftermath to sharing the story publicly. In April, I'd had a conversation with Kira about whether she was okay with being included in the book. "Of course," she'd said. "Our stories are intertwined. And honestly, I think it's important for people to understand we weren't competing with each other. We were both victims of the same person's lies. That solidarity matters. Thank you for understanding. I tried to present everything fairly, not making you look complicit or foolish. We were both foolish for believing Adrian. But we were also both smart enough to figure out the truth and demand accountability. That's what matters." By June 2026, I'd been with Bryce for a year. We'd moved in together in May, blending our lives carefully and thoughtfully. He'd been supportive through the book writing process, understanding when I needed space to work through memories, encouraging when the process felt overwhelming. "Do you think you'll ever fully move past what Adrian did?" he'd asked one evening. "I don't think you fully move past betrayal of that magnitude. But I think you integrate it. You learn from it. You let it shape you into someone wiser and stronger. That's what I'm trying to do. You're succeeding." The woman I know now is incredibly strong and clear about what she needs. That's admirable. Adrian taught me that, inadvertently. He showed me what dishonesty looks like, what manipulation feels like, what I'll never accept again. In a twisted way, his betrayal made me better at recognizing red flags and demanding honesty. Then, something good came from something terrible. Exactly. July brought my 33rd birthday, 3 years since Adrian and I had started dating. 2 years since I discovered his lies. So much had changed in those years. Mallory had organized a birthday dinner with close friends. During the toasts, she'd said something that had stuck with me. "Bryn has been through hell and come out the other side." She faced betrayal with courage, demanded justice with determination, and rebuilt her life with wisdom. But more than that, she turned her pain into purpose. She's helping other people facing similar situations. That's not just survival, that's transformation. We're all better for knowing her. I'd cried a little, grateful for the perspective. Because Mallory was right, I hadn't just survived Adrian's betrayal. I'd transformed it into something meaningful. The conference, speeches, the book, the conversations with women who'd reached out for advice, all of it had turned private pain into public good. That felt like the ultimate revenge. Not hurting Adrian back, but taking what he'd done and making it matter in positive ways. Helping people he'd never meet, in ways he'd never expected. By August, advance copies of the book had been printed. Seeing my story in actual book form had been surreal and emotional. It was real now, public, permanent. The book included everything: discovering the marriage certificate, investigating Adrian's double life, planning the exposure, the engagement party reveal, the trial, the aftermath. It included Kira's perspective too, showing how we'd both been victimized and how we'd worked together to ensure accountability. The agent had shown it to several reviewers, and the feedback had been consistently positive. Compelling, empowering, a must-read for anyone who's faced betrayal, skillfully written with emotional depth. I'd sent a copy to Kira. She'd called after reading it. "You did it justice. You told the whole story honestly. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me include you. The story wouldn't be complete without your perspective. Do you think Adrian will read it?" Probably. And I hope he does. I hope he sees clearly, in writing, exactly what he did and how it affected people. Maybe that will penetrate in a way that court judgments didn't. Maybe. Though I doubt it. People like Adrian don't usually develop self-awareness. True. But at least everyone else will see clearly who he is. September 2026 brought publication day. When He Promised Forever, Exposing the Man Who Lived Two Lives was released on September 15th, exactly 6 years after Adrian and Kira's wedding, exactly 2 years after I'd discovered the truth. The book had garnered immediate attention. Media outlets had wanted interviews. Book clubs had selected it. Women's organizations had asked me to speak. The story had resonated exactly as my agent had predicted. I'd done several interviews in the weeks after publication. The questions had been similar across platforms. Why did you wait 10 weeks to expose him instead of confronting him immediately? Because immediate confrontation would have let him control the narrative. By investigating first and exposing publicly with evidence, I ensured he couldn't lie his way out of consequences. Do you consider what you did revenge? I consider it justice. Revenge would have been doing something harmful to hurt him back. Justice was exposing the truth and ensuring he faced appropriate consequences for his actions. What do you want readers to take away from your story? That you don't have to accept betrayal silently. That strategic response is often more effective than emotional reaction. That demanding accountability isn't vindictive, it's self-respect, and that you can survive anything if you refuse to let it define you. The book had climbed bestseller lists quickly. Apparently, stories of refusing to be victimized resonated broadly. Women, and some men, who'd faced betrayal had found validation in my approach. People who'd been manipulated had found encouragement to demand better treatment. In October, I'd done a book tour 15 cities over 3 weeks, speaking at bookstores, libraries, and women's centers. The crowds had been large and engaged. People had wanted to share their own stories, ask advice, express gratitude for my willingness to be public about something so painful. One woman had approached me in Minneapolis with tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you for showing me I don't have to accept my husband's lies. He's been cheating for years, and I've been forgiving him every time because I love him. But your book made me realize love doesn't require accepting mistreatment. I'm filing for divorce next week. Your courage gave me courage. That conversation had made every difficult moment of writing and publishing worthwhile, because that woman and countless others like her were learning from my experience. They were demanding better. They were refusing to be victims. Adrian's betrayal had become a teaching tool. His lies had become a cautionary tale. His consequences had become a roadmap for others seeking justice. By November, I'd heard through various sources that Adrian was trying to rebuild his life in Florida. The fraud charges there had resulted in probation and restitution requirements, but not jail time. He was apparently working as a clerk in a retail store, far from the financial consulting career he'd once had. Some people had asked if I felt bad for how far he'd fallen. I'd been honest. No, I didn't. He'd built a career on appearing trustworthy while being fundamentally dishonest. Now he was facing the natural consequences of that dishonesty being exposed. That wasn't unfair, that was cause and effect. December 2026 marked 2 years since the engagement party exposure. I'd reflected on those 2 years in a journal entry. 2 years ago today, I stood in a ballroom and exposed Adrian's lies publicly. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, standing in front of everyone, revealing that my entire relationship had been fake, admitting I'd been deceived while simultaneously showing I'd refused to stay deceived. Looking back now, I'm proud of how I handled it. I could have confronted him privately and let him manipulate the situation. I could have stayed silent about what I'd discovered and just broken up without explanation. I could have accepted his lies and lived in denial. Instead, I investigated. I gathered evidence. I planned strategically. I exposed him publicly in a way that ensured he faced consequences. And then I rebuilt my life around honesty and genuine connection. Was it painful? Yes. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Because I learned I'm stronger than I knew. I learned I can face anything. I learned to demand honesty and respect as non-negotiable requirements. And I learned that transformation is possible, that betrayal doesn't have to define you if you refuse to let it. Adrian stole 18 months of my life with his lies. But in the 2 years since, I've built something real. A book that's helping people. A relationship based on honesty with Bryce. A life I'm genuinely proud of. A sense of self that's unshakable because I know I can handle anything. That's the real victory. Not that Adrian faced consequences, though he did and deserved them. but that I refused to let his betrayal destroy me, that I took the worst experience of my life and transformed it into growth, strength, and purpose. 2 years ago, I was humiliated and heartbroken. Now I'm empowered and whole. That's what refusing to be a victim looks like. On Christmas Eve 2026, what would have been my 2-year wedding anniversary with Adrian, Bryce had proposed. We'd been at dinner, a quiet restaurant, when he'd pulled out a ring. "Bryn, I love you. I admire your strength, your honesty, your refusal to accept anything less than what you deserve. You've shown me what genuine partnership looks like. Will you marry me?" I'd said yes immediately, because with Bryce, there were no lies, no hidden marriages, no deceptions. Just honest, genuine love, built on mutual respect and trust. The proposal had been everything Adrian's should have been, but wasn't real, honest, based on a relationship that was transparent and true. That evening, I'd called Kira to tell her the news. "That's wonderful! You deserve happiness with someone who actually values you. Thank you, and thank you for helping me get to this point. If you hadn't been willing to work with me on exposing Adrian, who knows if I'd have had the courage to demand better. We helped each other. That's what made it powerful. Are you doing okay? Dating anyone?" "I am, actually. Someone genuine and kind. It's different than what I thought I'd have with Adrian, but it's real. That matters more. It does. Real always matters more than perfect." As 2026 became 2027, I'd felt complete in a way I hadn't in years. The book was successful. The engagement to Bryce was joyful. My career was thriving. My relationships were honest and supportive. Adrian's betrayal had been terrible. But I'd survived it, exposed it, learned from it, and transformed it into something meaningful. That was the ultimate revenge, not hurting him, but building a life so much better than what he'd offered that his lies became irrelevant. Spring 2027 brought wedding planning, real wedding planning this time, with a man who'd never lied to me about his relationship status. Bryce and I had decided on a small June ceremony, intimate and genuine rather than elaborate and showy. No Christmas wedding this time? Mallory had teased when I'd told her the date. Definitely not. June seems safe from painful anniversaries. Planning had been different this time. With Adrian, every decision had felt fraught with his opinions and preferences, though I'd later realized many of those preferences had probably been influenced by what Kira liked. He'd been trying to please both of us simultaneously. With Bryce, planning was collaborative and easy. We'd agreed on most things, compromised smoothly on the rest. In April, I'd received a message from an unexpected source. Adrian's mother, Patricia. "Bryn, I read your book. I wanted to reach out and tell you how sorry I am for what Adrian did to you. And how proud I am of how you handled it. You showed remarkable strength and wisdom. I hope your new relationship brings you the happiness you deserve." I'd been moved by her message. Patricia hadn't needed to reach out. She certainly didn't owe me anything. But she'd chosen to acknowledge my experience and offer support. That had meant something. By May, wedding preparations had been nearly complete. Bryce and I had chosen a small venue, invited 50 close friends and family, kept everything simple and genuine. No elaborate displays, no unnecessary extravagance. Just honest celebration of a real relationship. One afternoon while addressing invitations, I'd thought about the contrast with Adrian's planned wedding. That had been scheduled for December 24th, elaborate and romantic, designed to look perfect for photos and social media. But it had all been fake, built on his lies about who he was and what he wanted. This wedding was smaller, simpler, less photogenic. But it was real, built on a relationship where we'd both been honest from the beginning, where trust had been established through consistent truthfulness, where commitment meant something genuine. "You look thoughtful," Bryce had observed, seeing my expression. "Just thinking about how different this is from what I thought I'd have with Adrian. Better or worse? Better. Infinitely better. Because it's real." On June 12th, 2027, Bryce and I got married. It was a beautiful ceremony, heartfelt vows, genuine tears, celebration with people who actually knew and loved us. Kira had flown in from Portland to attend, wanting to support this chapter of my life after supporting me through the worst chapter. During the reception, my father had given a toast that had captured everything. "Bryn has always been strong. But the past 3 years showed us just how strong. She faced betrayal that would have broken many people. She demanded justice when it would have been easier to stay silent. She rebuilt her life when it would have been tempting to stay bitter. And now she's married to a man who values her honesty, her strength, and her refusal to accept less than she deserves. Bryce, you're a lucky man. Bryn, we're proud of you. To the happy couple. That night, after the reception, Bryce and I had gone back to our hotel room and just talked for hours. About the wedding, about the future, about how far we'd both come to get to this point. Do you think about Adrian much anymore? Bryce had asked. Rarely. Sometimes, when people bring up the book or ask about what happened. But mostly, he's just someone from my past. Someone who taught me important lessons but doesn't have power over my present. That's growth. It is. 3 years ago, I was engaged to someone who was lying to me constantly. 2 years ago, I was dealing with the aftermath of exposing those lies. Now, I'm married to someone who's never given me reason to doubt his honesty. That's transformation. By August, we'd settled into married life easily, living together, building routines, planning for the future. It was comfortable and genuine in ways my relationship with Adrian never had been. In September, the book's 1-year anniversary had brought renewed media attention. I'd done a few follow-up interviews, discussing what had changed in the year since publication. Has Adrian responded to the book? One interviewer had asked. Not directly to me. I've heard through various channels that he's not happy about being exposed publicly in this way. But my response to that is, he created the situation by his own actions. I just documented what happened truthfully. If he's embarrassed by the truth, that's his issue to work through. Do you have any regrets about writing it? None. The book has helped too many people for me to regret making my story public. If my experience can help someone else recognize manipulation, demand honesty, or refuse to accept betrayal, then sharing it was worthwhile, regardless of Adrian's feelings about it. October 2027 brought surprising news. I'd found out I was pregnant. Bryce and I had been trying for a few months, and the positive test had been joyful and terrifying simultaneously. We're having a baby, I'd told him, tears streaming down my face. We're having a baby, he'd repeated, pulling me into a hug. This is amazing. That evening, I'd thought about the future I'd thought I'd have 3 years ago. Married to Adrian, possibly with children, building a life that was fundamentally based on his lies. If I'd married him before discovering the truth, those children would have been born into a family built on deception. Instead, this baby would be born into a family built on honesty, with parents who'd both chosen truth and genuine connection over comfortable illusions. That felt like the best possible foundation. November brought Thanksgiving, and with it, reflection on gratitude. I'd been grateful for so much, for finding those documents before marriage, for having the courage to investigate, for the support of family and friends, for meeting Bryce, for the success of the book, for this pregnancy. But mostly, I'd been grateful for the strength I discovered in myself. The strength to face betrayal without collapsing, the strength to demand justice without apology, the strength to rebuild without bitterness. Adrian had tried to steal my future. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the tools to build a better one. That irony was my favorite part of the entire story. December 2027 marked 3 years since the engagement party exposure. 3 years since I'd stood in that ballroom and revealed Adrian's secret marriage to everyone who mattered. Looking back from the vantage point of 3 years later, it felt like a different lifetime. I'd journaled about it on December 10th. 3 years ago today, I exposed Adrian's lies publicly. It was terrifying and empowering simultaneously. I had no idea if my plan would work, if people would believe me, if the consequences would be sufficient. Now, 3 years later, I can see the full arc of what happened. Adrian lost everything: his relationships, his reputation, his career, his standing in the community. He's rebuilding in Florida, far from anyone who knew him during his deception. That's appropriate, but more importantly, I rebuilt. I wrote a book that's helped thousands of people. I married someone genuine and honest. I'm pregnant with a child who'll be born into a family built on truth. I've learned to demand honesty and respect as non-negotiable requirements in all relationships. Adrian's betrayal taught me I'm strong enough to handle anything. That's a gift, even though he never meant to give it to me. 3 years ago, I thought my life was ending. It was actually beginning. On my terms, with my boundaries, building toward a future I actually want, rather than one based on someone else's lies. I won, not because Adrian lost, though he did, but because I refused to let his betrayal define me. I took the worst experience of my life and transformed it into growth, purpose, and genuine happiness. That's the real revenge, being so much better than he ever deserved. Christmas Eve, 2027. What would have been my 3-year wedding anniversary with Adrian, I'd spent quietly with Bryce, celebrating our first married Christmas together, talking about the baby who'd arrive in May. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you'd married Adrian?" Bryce had asked. "Sometimes. I think about how miserable I'd have been, building a life with someone who was fundamentally dishonest. How the lies would have compounded over years. How discovering the truth after marriage would have been infinitely more complicated and painful. Are you glad you found out when you did? Absolutely. Finding those documents was the luckiest, unlucky thing that ever happened to me. Lucky because I discovered the truth before legal marriage. Unlucky because I'd wasted 18 months on someone fake. But the timing could have been so much worse. You made the best of a terrible situation. I made the only choice that allowed me to respect myself. That's what I want our child to learn, that self-respect isn't optional. That accepting mistreatment isn't virtuous. That demanding honesty is reasonable, not demanding." By January 2028, I'd started preparing for motherhood in earnest. Mallory had thrown me a baby shower. Friends and family had celebrated this new chapter. Everything had felt genuine and joyful. In February, I'd received a surprising message from Kira. "I'm getting married. Remember the guy I mentioned I'd been dating? He proposed. I said yes. I wanted you to know because you played such an important role in my journey to getting here." "That's wonderful. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Thank you, and thank you for everything you did 3 years ago. If you hadn't contacted me about Adrian, I might have wasted more years on a fake marriage. Instead, I found something real. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. We helped each other. That's what made it work." We talked for over an hour that day, catching up on our separate lives, marveling at how much had changed since we'd first met in that ballroom. Two strangers connected by one man's lies, now friends celebrating genuine relationships built on honesty. March brought the finalization of damages collection from Adrian. After 3 years of wage garnishment and slow payments, he'd finally paid the full $35,000 the court had ordered. Theodore had called to inform me the case was officially closed. "How does it feel?" he'd asked. Like closure. He faced full consequences: financial, professional, social, legal. There's nothing left unresolved. You handled this remarkably well. From investigation through exposure through aftermath. I hope you're proud of yourself. I am. 3 years ago, I was terrified of what exposing him would mean. Now I can see it was exactly the right choice. The only choice that allowed me to move forward with self-respect intact. In April, 1 month before my due date, I'd finished writing a second book. This one wasn't about Adrian specifically. It was a guide for people facing betrayal, offering practical advice on investigation, exposure, and recovery based on what I'd learned. "You're really leaning into this as a platform," my agent had observed when I'd sent her the manuscript. If I went through all that pain, I want it to mean something beyond just my own experience. If I can help other people navigate betrayal more effectively, then something good came from something terrible. This will help people. I'm sure of it. May 12th, 2028, our daughter was born. We'd named her Claire, a name chosen carefully, with no connections to painful past. She was healthy and beautiful, and holding her had felt like the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since discovering Adrian's lies. "She's perfect," Bryce had said, looking at her in the hospital. "She is, and she'll grow up knowing her parents chose truth and honesty. That's the best foundation we can give her." Looking at Claire, I'd thought about the future. I'd almost had children with Adrian, born into a family built on his deceptions. Those hypothetical children would have grown up learning that lies were acceptable, that manipulation was normal, that honesty was optional. Claire would grow up differently. She'd see parents who'd both demanded truth. She'd learn that self-respect was non-negotiable. She'd understand that accepting mistreatment wasn't virtuous or loving, it was self-destructive. That was Adrian's ultimate defeat, not just that he'd lost me, but that he'd lost the chance to build a family with someone who demanded better. That his lies had cost him the future he'd claimed to want. By summer 2028, life had settled into a new normal. Motherhood, marriage, work, the occasional book event or speaking engagement. I'd built something stable and genuine, so far removed from the chaos of 3 years prior that it sometimes felt like those events had happened to someone else. But they hadn't happened to someone else. They'd happened to me. And I'd survived them, grown from them, transformed them into something meaningful. That was the lesson I wanted Claire to learn as she grew. You can survive anything. You can face betrayal without breaking. You can demand justice without becoming bitter. You can rebuild your life when everything collapses. And you can do all of it with strength, wisdom, and grace. August 2028 marked 4 years since I'd been engaged to Adrian. 4 years since I'd thought I knew what my future looked like, only to discover it was built entirely on lies. Looking back from the vantage point of marriage to Bryce and motherhood to Claire, those days felt impossibly distant. I'd been invited to speak at a major women's conference in Chicago, ironically, the same city where Adrian had built his double life. The speech had been scheduled for August 15th, and I decided to accept despite the memories the city held. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" Bryce had asked when I'd told him about the invitation. "I think I need to prove to myself that Chicago doesn't belong to Adrian in my mind, that I can go there and focus on helping people rather than dwelling on what happened." The conference had been massive, over 1,000 attendees. I'd been one of 3 keynote speakers, my topic, "From Victim to Victor, Refusing to Let Betrayal Define You." I'd told my story again, the discovery, the investigation, the exposure, the aftermath. But this time, I'd focused more on the transformation than the trauma. Betrayal changes you, I'd said to the audience. The question is, how does it change you? Does it make you bitter or better, broken or stronger, defined by what was done to you, or defined by how you responded? When I discovered my fiancé was married to someone else, I had choices. I could have stayed silent about what I'd learned and just ended the relationship quietly. I could have confronted him privately and let him manipulate the narrative. I could have exposed him immediately with emotion rather than strategy. Instead, I investigated. I gathered evidence. I planned carefully. I exposed him publicly in a way that ensured he couldn't lie his way out of consequences. And then I rebuilt my life around honesty and genuine connection. Was it hard? Yes. Did I make mistakes? Probably. But I refused to let his betrayal define me as a victim. I chose to become someone who demanded accountability, built something meaningful from pain, and transformed trauma into purpose. That's available to all of you facing betrayal. You get to choose how this changes you. Choose strength, choose growth, choose to demand better. Don't let anyone, not even someone who hurt you deeply, determine who you become. The standing ovation had been overwhelming. After my speech, women had lined up to talk to me, some sharing their stories, some asking advice, some just wanting to express gratitude for modeling strength. One woman had particularly stuck with me. She'd been probably mid-50s, well-dressed, composed. "My husband cheated on me for 15 years before I found out," she'd told me. When I discovered it, I was devastated. But I stayed with him because I thought that's what you do in marriage. You forgive and work through it. We're still together, and I'm miserable. Your speech made me realize I chose to let his betrayal define me as someone who accepts mistreatment. I need to make a different choice. "What will you do?" I'd asked gently. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living like this. If you could demand accountability from your fiancé, I can demand it from my husband, even if it means ending the marriage. You deserve honesty and respect. Those aren't unreasonable expectations. Thank you for reminding me of that." Conversations like that had made every difficult moment of the past 4 years worthwhile. Because my story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing others that strength was possible, that demanding better was reasonable, that transformation could follow trauma. In September 2028, Kira had gotten married to her fiancé. I'd flown to Portland for the wedding, bringing Bryce and baby Claire. It had been beautiful, genuine, joyful, built on honest foundation. After the ceremony, Kira and I had talked privately. 4 years ago, we were both engaged to the same man without knowing it, she'd said. Now we're both married to genuine, honest men. We did okay, didn't we? We did better than okay. We survived betrayal and built something real. That's remarkable. Do you ever hear anything about Adrian? Not in months. Last I heard, he was still in Florida, still working retail. He's basically disappeared from everyone's radar. Good. He doesn't deserve attention or discussion. He's just someone we used to know, who taught us important lessons about red flags and honesty. Exactly. He's a cautionary tale, not a continuing presence in our lives. October brought the release of my second book, The Practical Guide for People Facing Betrayal. It had been well received, with reviewers praising its concrete advice and actionable strategies. The agent had been right. The combination of my personal story in the first book and practical guidance in the second had created a comprehensive resource for people navigating betrayal. The books had started being used in therapy practices, domestic violence organizations, and women's support groups. By November, I'd been approached about developing a podcast or video series based on the books. The idea had been to interview people who'd faced betrayal and discuss their strategies for investigation, exposure, and recovery. You've built an entire platform from one terrible experience, Mallory had observed when I'd told her about the opportunity. That's the goal. If I went through that pain, I want it to matter. I want it to help people. Every person who reads the books, attends a speech, or listens to the podcast and decides to demand better treatment that makes what Adrian did to me worthwhile. That's not just transformation. That's alchemy. Turning pain into purpose. December 2028 marked 4 years since the engagement party exposure. 4 years since I'd stood in that ballroom and revealed Adrian's secret marriage. So much had changed in those 4 years. I'd written a journal entry reflecting on the anniversary. 4 years ago, I did the scariest thing I'd ever done. I exposed Adrian's lies publicly, in front of everyone who mattered. I had no idea if it would work, if people would support me, if the consequences would be sufficient. Now, 4 years later, I can see the full impact. Adrian lost everything: relationships, reputation, career. He's rebuilding somewhere else, far from his past. That's appropriate, but I rebuilt too. I married someone genuine. I have a beautiful daughter. I've written books that have helped thousands of people. I've built a platform dedicated to helping others demand honesty and accountability. Adrian's betrayal was terrible, but it led to transformation I never would have achieved otherwise. It forced me to examine what I deserved, what I'd accept, how I'd respond to mistreatment. It made me stronger, wiser, more committed to truth. 4 years ago, I exposed a liar. In doing so, I discovered who I really was, someone capable of incredible strength, strategic thinking, and purposeful living. That's the real story, not what Adrian did to me, but how I responded. Not his betrayal, but my transformation. Not his lies, but my insistence on truth. 4 years later, I'm grateful for the experience. Not because I'm glad it happened, I'm not, but because I'm proud of how I handled it. And that pride is worth everything. Christmas Eve 2028, what would have been my 4th wedding anniversary with Adrian, I'd spent with Bryce and Claire, celebrating our 2nd married Christmas together. We'd put Claire to bed early and sat together by the tree, talking about the future. "Do you think you'll ever stop marking these anniversaries?" Bryce had asked. "The engagement party? The would-be wedding date? Probably not. They're part of my story now, but they're less painful every year. More just markers of how far I've come, rather than reminders of what I lost. You didn't lose anything real. The relationship with Adrian was fake. True. But I lost the illusion. And grieving illusions is real even if the relationships weren't. Fair point. But you gained so much more than you lost. Me, Claire, your platform, your strength. That's all real. It is. And that's what matters most. As 2028 became 2029, I'd felt complete peace with what had happened 4 years prior. Adrian's betrayal had been terrible, but I'd transformed it into something meaningful. His lies had taught me to demand truth. His deception had showed me the value of genuine connection. He'd tried to steal my future. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the tools to build a better one. That irony was my favorite part of the entire story. And it was a story that now helped other people build better futures too. Spring 2029 brought an unexpected development. I'd been contacted by a producer interested in adapting my first book into a limited television series. The idea had been to dramatize the investigation, exposure, and aftermath, showing the strategic elements of how I'd handled the betrayal, rather than just focusing on the emotional aspects. "Would you be comfortable with your story being adapted?" The producer had asked during our initial conversation. as long as it's done accurately and focuses on the empowerment elements rather than just the drama. I don't want it to be salacious. I want it to show that strategic response to betrayal is possible. That's exactly the angle we'd take. This would be about a woman who refuses to be a victim, who investigates thoroughly, who exposes lies strategically, and who rebuilds her life with strength. It's inspirational. I'd agreed to consult on the series, ensuring accuracy and appropriate messaging. The project had been scheduled to film in late 2029 for release in early 2030. In May, Claire's first birthday had brought reflection on how much had changed in 1 year. Motherhood had transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated, making me more patient, more protective, more focused on modeling strength and self-respect. "What do you want Claire to know about what happened with Adrian?" Bryce had asked during her birthday party. "When she's old enough to understand?" That her mom demanded honesty and accountability. That refusing to accept betrayal isn't vindictive, it's self-respect. That you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. Those are lessons I want her to learn early. By summer, the podcast series had launched. Truth Over Everything. Conversations about betrayal and recovery featured weekly interviews with people who'd faced various betrayals and how they'd responded strategically. The response had been overwhelming. Within 3 months, the podcast had over 100,000 regular listeners. People had written to share how episodes had helped them recognize manipulation in their own relationships, given them courage to demand accountability, shown them that strategic response was possible. In August 2029, I'd done a 5-year anniversary speaking event, returning to Chicago to speak at the same hotel where the engagement party exposure had happened. The hotel had even offered to host the event in the same ballroom, which had felt appropriately symbolic. 5 years ago, in this very room, I'd begun my speech. I did something terrifying. I exposed my fiancé's lies publicly, in front of everyone who mattered to us. He was married to someone else, had been for 3 years, and planned to commit bigamy by marrying me on Christmas Eve. That exposure changed everything. It ended my relationship. It destroyed his reputation. It led to legal consequences. It was painful and difficult and necessary. But it also led to transformation. His betrayal forced me to examine what I deserved, what I'd accept, how I'd respond to mistreatment. It made me demand honesty and accountability. It showed me I was capable of incredible strength. 5 years later, I'm married to someone genuine. I have a beautiful daughter. I've written books and built a platform dedicated to helping others demand better treatment. I've transformed pain into purpose. That's what I want you to take from my story. Betrayal is terrible, but it doesn't have to define you. You get to choose how you respond. You get to demand accountability. You get to rebuild your life around honesty and genuine connection. 5 years ago, I refused to be a victim. That choice changed everything. And that choice is available to all of you. The standing ovation had been longer than at any previous speech. After dozens of people had approached to share their stories, many of them saying they'd been at the original engagement party 5 years ago and watched the exposure happen in real time. I was there that night. One woman had told me. "I was a friend of Adrian's from work. Watching you stand up there and reveal his lies with such composure and evidence, it was powerful. It made me examine my own relationships and demand better treatment. Thank you." Conversations like that had validated every difficult choice I'd made 5 years prior. Because the exposure hadn't just been about Adrian facing consequences, it had been about modeling strength for others, showing that refusing victimhood was possible. By September, the television adaptation had begun filming. I'd visited the set a few times, watching actors portray versions of me, Adrian, Kira, and others. It had been surreal and emotional seeing my worst experiences dramatized, but also seeing the empowerment elements emphasized. The actress playing me had asked several questions about my thought process during the investigation and exposure. "What was going through your mind when you stood up at that engagement party to reveal everything?" she'd asked. Terror and determination. Terror that my plan might not work, that people might not believe me, that Adrian might somehow turn it around. But determination that he deserved to face consequences publicly, that his lies needed to be exposed irreversibly. And after? What did you feel after the exposure? Relief, mostly. Relief that the truth was out. Relief that I'd done what needed to be done. And strange emptiness. I'd been focused on the plan for so long that once it was executed, I wasn't sure what came next. That's powerful. I'll try to bring that complexity to the performance. In October, I turned 34. My family had thrown a birthday party, celebrating not just my age but everything I'd accomplished since the darkness of 5 years prior. My father had given a toast that had moved me to tears. 5 years ago, Bryn faced betrayal that would have broken many people. She could have collapsed into victimhood. She could have stayed silent about what she'd discovered. She could have let Adrian control the narrative with his lies. Instead, she investigated with patience. She exposed with strategy. She demanded accountability with strength. And she rebuilt her life with wisdom. We've watched her transform pain into purpose, betrayal into platform, trauma into teaching tool. She's helped thousands of people through her books, speeches, and podcast. She's modeled what demanding respect looks like. Bryn, we're proud of you, not just for surviving, but for thriving, not just for exposing lies, but for building truth, not just for refusing to be a victim, but for becoming an advocate for others. Happy birthday. By November, preparations for the television series release were well underway. Marketing had begun, with promotional materials emphasizing the empowerment angle. Based on a true story of a woman who refused to be a victim and strategically exposed her fiancé's secret marriage. December 2029 marked 5 years since the engagement party exposure. 5 years since I'd stood in that ballroom and revealed Adrian's lies. Half a decade of transformation, growth, and purpose built from pain. I'd written a final journal entry reflecting on those 5 years. 5 years ago today, I exposed Adrian's lies publicly. It was the scariest and most necessary thing I'd ever done. I had no idea what the outcome would be, whether I'd made the right choice, if the consequences would be sufficient. Now, 5 years later, I know. I made exactly the right choice. Adrian deserved to face public consequences for private betrayal. Kira deserved to know the truth about her husband's double life. I deserved to demand accountability. 5 years later, Adrian is somewhere in Florida, far from anyone who knew him during his deception. He lost everything through his own choices. That's appropriate, but I gained everything. I married someone genuine and honest. I have a beautiful daughter. I've written books that have helped thousands of people. I've built a platform dedicated to ensuring others don't suffer silently through betrayal. Adrian's lies tried to destroy my future. Instead, they forced me to build a better one. His betrayal taught me strength I didn't know I had. His deception showed me the value of honesty and genuine connection. 5 years later, I'm grateful for the experience. Not because I'm glad it happened, it was terrible, but because I'm proud of how I handled it. And that pride, that strength, that transformation, those are worth everything Adrian tried to steal from me. He promised me a Christmas wedding. What he gave me instead was the opportunity to discover who I really was, someone capable of incredible strength, strategic thinking, and purposeful living. That's a better gift than marriage to a liar ever would have been. 5 years later, I've transformed his worst into my best. And that's the ultimate victory.